everybody, and thank you for joining me. This is Chrystal Lynn with the Cowgirl Astrologer, and I am so excited today. I have Armand Diaz here, and he is with Integral Astrology, and he has written an amazing book. I'm talking amazing. It's called Separating Aspects, and it's the astrology of breakups, divorce, and other partings. And Armand is Ph.D. He does speaking all over. He's got an amazing YouTube channel. I actually found Armand about a year ago, and I thought, wow, this is really fascinating stuff. So I'm really privileged, and I thank you, Armand, for coming on my channel. And hello, and how are you over there? You're in New York right now.
I am. Thanks for having me here, Chrystal, and I'm really happy to be here. As a matter of fact, I have Mars conjunct Saturn on my ascendant today, so I'm really happy to be anywhere.
Oh, wow, wow. Well, see, this is proof that exciting things can happen.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to bring out this amazing study that you have done through this book. It's the questions I've been asking through astrology. It's a deep study, so you know, for me, I kind of had to be ready to open up to it. But it's the study of, you know, the themes and descriptions of breakups and relationships, and it gave me a lot of kind of like understanding of the different things I was going through that I couldn't explain at the time. And I was just wanting to ask you off the bat, how did you, what inspired you for this book?
Well, you know, people come to astrologers a lot with relationship stuff, and that's just part of the thing that you do with astrology. You do a lot of relationship, and like any astrologer, that was a major theme for me. And you know, some people do come when things are going great and feeling wonderful, but a lot of people come when they have worries and problems, and they feel the relationship isn't going so well. And to tell you the truth, my Scorpio ascendant, I get a lot of people that things are going kind of badly indeed, and the relationship's coming to an ending, and sometimes they're struggling to get out of it, or they're struggling to hold on to it. And that just was a theme that I saw with my clients, and I said, well, you know, this is it's not the happiest, most upbeat area of relationships, but it's one of them that people are really concerned with. And I think I have to say, too, I don't think that the book is maudlin, depressing, or anything like that. It kind of shows the way that a ending of a relationship is painful, perhaps, but it's also the beginning of something else. It's also the opening up to new opportunities. And, you know, when things clear out, usually people are much better off. They usually feel better. In the midst of a breakup, people will tell you it's awful. A year later, most people will say that they're doing okay. 3 years later, most people are fine. And 5 years later, they're usually like, I can't believe I was with that bozo. So, you know, ultimately, it usually is a pretty healthy process for most people. And so helping them through it was a big priority.
Yeah, well, I wish I would have had this book. And I love that you even give tips for each of the different types of breakups, which we're going to get into in this segment, but even tips on how to get through them, you know, that these are real experiences that we're having. And I think for me, it really helped me realize I'm not alone. So many of the emotions and the fears and the pain and all of that you go through, you feel like you're the only one in the world experiencing this. And so I was just like kind of relieved to know that I wasn't.
No, there are real themes, and they're really very recognizable. They really are. And I put the emphasis on the 4 outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and say that the breakup will have the theme of one of those 4 planets, the predominant theme of one of those 4 planets. And when you start looking into it, you start to get the sense. You know, it's almost a little bit like, if you know the type of breakup you're having, if you know where you are with something, you almost know what type of music to listen to. You almost know what movie to go see, because these things are around. This is our common experience. You know, we all go through different types of painful experiences. I focused on breakups in this book, but we all go through different types of painful experiences, and there is a lot of support out there. There are a lot of people who have said, you know, this is what it feels like, and it stinks, you know, but it's out there, and once you sort of learn how to key into it, it really becomes very accessible. You start to realize, well, this is what's happening.
So as an astrologer, and as you were beginning to unfold these stories, what was one of the, you know, most dominant themes that you saw while looking at the charts? What, like, screamed out at you as a theme? Was it one thing, or was it, you know, several things that you kept seeing over and over again?
Well, it was that those 4 outer planets, one of those 4 outer planets had its fingerprints all over a breakup. That was just the thing that I saw, that, you know, you could look at it in many, many different ways. You could look at the dynamics of the relationships. You could look at a lot of different things for what was happening with an individual. But really, when you look at the breakup, there's one thing going on there that is really going to be the dominant theme. Not the only thing necessarily, but the dominant theme. And if you talk to the dominant theme, if you try to explain the dominant theme, this is a Plutonian situation. This is what you have to watch out for. This is where you have your opportunities. This is, you know, there's a little danger here, and it might be in this department, and there's some opportunities, and you might want to look over here. It was entirely that if you just know which one of these themes to key into. In the book itself, I really do go into. Let me show the book over here.
Showing it over here too.
Thank you, and thank you for that. You can't show it enough. One of the things that, you know, I talk about different relationship patterns in many different ways. I talk about the role of different planets in relationships. It's actually a book about relationships in general, even apart from breakups. But then, you know, when you look at the breakups, you find that one dominant theme. And astrologers, when they do that, they'll be able to find it, and I think other people can find it as well.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that I saw in this, is that, you know, just describing, for example, the Plutonian theme, you know, I mean, how powerful that was. So how would you describe the Plutonian theme for people out there that...
Well, the Plutonian theme comes in, there's usually, first of all, the planet Pluto will be involved in the actual astrology. An astrologer can usually pick it out. Although, to tell you the truth, I think that somebody who's not an astrologer, if they read the book, they can probably figure out this is a Plutonian situation. In a sense, you don't really need anybody else to tell you what you're in the midst of. Once you've had the experience, you sort of know this is Plutonian or this is Neptunian. It's kind of obvious. But with the Plutonian theme, what you find is that there are real power struggles, and they're really going on within the individual. They really are the individual's power struggles. They really are the individual, you know, trying to become emancipated, trying to free themselves. And what happens is you drag up a lot of other power issues, so that, you know, when you're having this issue with your partner and you're struggling with your partner, you know, everything that has been an issue for you in terms of power struggles in your life becomes sort of attached to it. It's sort of like a volcanic type of thing, where everything buried from below the surface comes bubbling up. And that is, you know, that is quite difficult, because, you know, if you're dealing with a Plutonian theme, then you're dealing with your partner and their issues, but you're also dealing with maybe both of your issues from childhood. You know, I mean, it could be your parents and, you know, the sense of abandonment you had from your parents. It may be from a past life. So there's almost no end to how deep you can go with bringing up the sort of bilious anger type of thing that comes up. You know, on the other hand, it's also an opportunity to clear out all that stuff. And if you do it with a certain amount of consciousness and realize that you're projecting a lot of stuff onto your partner, then you can start to really go forward and actually wind up in a better place.
Sorry about that. I'm having a little difficult. What's going on with this? I'm not sure if you can... Let's see here.
I don't know. I have multiple screens of myself.
I know. This is kind of acting a little strange, so let's just take a break here 1 second, see if I can't... what have I done? Let's see. Getting used to these Google Hangouts. We're just going to keep you up there for right now. On page 103, of separating aspects. You talk about the Plutonian pitfalls, and one of the descriptions I really liked is, Plutonian pitfalls include a sort of manipulation and superfuge, but perhaps the real hallmark of Plutonian pitfalls is the scorched earth policy, an approach that seeks to annihilate the other. As emotional material from the distant past is brought up by present circumstances and relived in its fury, people can consume past and present. There is a sense that they must win, not simply resolve issues, but win at all costs. They very casting of the former partner as other or enemy is already a step in the direction of the take no prisoners approach that is associated with Pluto.
Yeah. It can get nasty. It can get nasty because, again, it's bringing up, Pluto transits bring up everything that has a similar vibe from the past. Whatever it was at whatever point in time that gave you a sense of a loss of control, a sense of not having the ability to control your own destiny. The sense of abandonment is often part of Plutonian things, and so you become this sort of take no prisoners, scorched earth type of, I'm gonna take out on you, the partner. I'm gonna take out on you all of the hurt that I've ever felt. So you're leaving me. See, this is bad. But now I have pain from the past of people leaving me, and I'm gonna get back at them through you. So that can be very difficult. There can be a lot of difficulty that comes up over that, and you sometimes see with Plutonian breakups, you sometimes see this kind of real cruelty and this volcanic anger that just knows no boundaries.
Yes, and it's interesting because as you get into the dynamics of a breakup, of course, it's not just the two breaking up, but then as they repair or repairing with other people, then they have themes going on in the background that are now connecting to the themes that you have going on. So as I was experiencing a Neptunian experience, my separated partner was experiencing Plutonian experiences. So in one of your, page 114 of your book, this is talking about the Neptunian. One extreme is that of loss. We all hurt during a separation, but Neptune can make it seem as though the pain is all there is. To an extent, a person going through a Neptunian separation can be enveloped in pain and sadness and loss that become their entire universe. It is usually difficult to work with this because the pain is, in its own way, a kind of drug. And that's pretty heavy stuff that people are going through, that probably feel like they don't see a way out, and the pain, like you said, just becomes all encompassing.
It's unusual. It doesn't sound very. It's not a very easy thing to understand rationally. But Neptune is not a particularly rational planet, and so what happens with a Neptunian breakup? What can happen? Not all Neptunian breakups are going to go to that extreme. I mean, I give some extreme examples in the book in each of the styles, but. What can happen with a Neptunian breakup is that, going through the pain and that sense of loss, the sense of really who I've been identified as part of this couple. I've been identified as being with this person, and now they're not there anymore. Now that we've separated, now I'm just sort of an open wound. This sort of, ongoing, and there's just completely porous boundaries because that other part of me is gone. And what happens is the pain itself starts to fill that gap, and the person doesn't want to let go of the pain. They'd rather hurt than move on and not have that, at least that attachment to the relationship. Now that's a very, very extreme. That's a very, very extreme case, but there's something of that. There's something of that whenever there's a Neptunian breakup. I mean, I don't think it's that hard to imagine for most people, that the idea that, sometimes when something ends, you almost kind of want to go and revisit some things that are going to hurt a little bit, because, it kind of brings you back to the moment there a little bit. It kind of brings you to that point of the relationship, and there you know that there is something there. But with an extreme, then you don't ever want to leave that. This becomes your new identity, as you're the person who feels really bad about this thing.
Right, right. Well, and yeah, these are definitely some extreme cases, but as I get clients as well and do readings, I see a lot of this where they're just and stuck in that cycle. And I thought it was interesting when you talk about the Neptunian theme, how it's almost as if and I'm a Pisces rising and Pisces moon, so I can tell you that we tend to create a movie, a story in all of our, visions and relationships. And so, as you say here, that sometimes that story begins to dissolve, or it's maybe not as much in reality as it should be. So when the reality sets in, a lot of times the relationship really suffers.
Yeah, that would be a Neptunian relationship, because I talk about the styles of breakups, but these same styles also apply to the relationships themselves. So you can have a Neptunian relationship. It doesn't need to end. It just sometimes some relationships are Neptunian. Some individuals have a very Neptunian approach to relationship. And yeah, I mean there is that sense of you're running a movie. Yeah. And and when somebody starts to go off script, it becomes a problem.
And what about when people are going to counseling and they're trying to work this out? I mean, is it realistic to say in a Neptunian situation that they need to create a new movie together? I mean, is that possible that what was happening, they're going through that change, and can they survive that? Can that be survived by recreating a new story for the future of a relationship? Sometimes the old story's got to go.
Yeah.
I know. I'm throwing you off into Pisces land, but I'm just these are some.
But that's Pisces land. You get into the Neptunian thing, you just keep flowing with it and see where it goes. Can you create a new movie together? Maybe. It's a possibility. You have to have the awareness that that's what's happened. You have to have the awareness that, there was a movie and we've gone off script, and now do we want, can we go back in there and make a sequel? And you have to consider, as with any movie, you want to consider, well, did it gross enough to make a sequel?
Right.
And not always. The other thing is, too, as we pointed out, one person could be in the midst of this Neptunian thing, and they kind of want to hold on, and they want to see if they can re-script the whole relationship. Whereas another person could be in the midst of a Uranian breakup, and they just want out. That's just it. It's just over with. They've already passed that point. And that's where I think that something like counseling can become a little bit dicey if there isn't the awareness of how radically different the perspectives can be. The two partners can see things in such completely different ways, and in part, it's time limited. Even a long Pluto transit lasts for a certain amount of time. It can be a few years, but it lasts for a certain amount of time. But that has a real important effect on the dynamics of a breakup. It has a real important effect on the dynamics of a relationship.
Yeah, and I think also, people who marry that are, 7-8 years apart, they're going through different Saturns at different times. Are those all things to take into consideration? I mean,
Yes, well, Saturn, yeah, the Saturn cycle is, I think, probably the most obvious in a relationship. Saturn has a complete tour of the zodiac every 29 years, and so the quarter of the cycle is about between 7 and 8 years, and then at 14 years and 21 to 22 years, and you very frequently see breakups occurring at those points. The famous 7-year itch is exactly the description of a quarter of a Saturn cycle. And the timing of relationships and the timing of breakups very, very typically falls into Saturnian territory.
Yeah, so as Saturn, it's, oh, I've got this problem over here. Let's see.
I see that.
I am so sorry. There we go. Let's see if we can.
Oh, you're back.
There we go. I'm back. I'm still getting used to this thing, but I think we're talking about some valuable stuff, so we'll keep at it.
Sure.
Now, when you talk about, like, give me an example what you look for when you say, like, you know, a Plutonian aspect, like, you know, are we talking about Pluto, square the moon, square Venus? I mean, are there specific ones that you look at first when you're talking about the aspects that you're looking at when you are, you know, creating this theme here?
Well, I mean, for the relationship picture, you would look at things like there's a wider variety of Plutonian things. For example, somebody that has Scorpio on the cusp of the house of relationships, and Scorpio is the Plutonian sign, or somebody that has Venus in Scorpio, or if there is an aspect between Pluto and Venus, there would be a Plutonian theme. So there's a wide variety of things. When it comes to looking at the breakup, there's very frequently a direct relationship between the outer planet and some important relationship planet. So it could, in that case, it could be a transit of Pluto to natal Venus, or a transit of Pluto to the ruler of the house of relationship, or it could be a transit of Pluto to the sun or the moon. There's a number of different possibilities, but yeah, usually something like that. Usually you see something rather direct with the breakup. The overall relationship pattern, there's a lot more possibilities.
Now, when you look at you know, relationships that last a long time, because we've talked a little bit about the different generations, you know, what was happening 30 years ago versus what's happening out there right now. You know, generationally, what are you seeing in the changes of these relationships?
Well, I think that the most important thing that's happening, and since the 70s, when Pluto and Uranus were conjunct in the house, in the sign of Libra, which is essentially the relationship sign, or at any rate, Libra signifies a lot of things, but relationship is certainly one of them. And what happened at that time was that relationships in the West, and really across the globe, went through major changes. And so, in a sense, the relationships that were present before the 70s or the 60s or the 70s, in a sense, were more or less likely to be Saturnian in nature. People had rules about relationships. They had roles that they fulfilled in them, and there wasn't a great deal of reflection about relationship. I opened the book with the statement that I don't think my grandparents had a relationship. And what I meant was not that they didn't relate to each other, not that they didn't care for each other and, you know, piss each other off and do all those other things, but I don't think that they thought about it in the sense of what is our relationship. Do we have a good relation? You know, it was just simply they had their roles, they fulfilled them, and they, you know, there was a script. Since the 70s, we have torn up the script, and what has happened is we are forging ahead, trying to make our own way with things and trying to be more creative, more individualistic, less bound to the rules, less bound to the roles of relationship. And that is incredibly liberating. It is incredibly freeing. It is incredibly difficult. It is incredibly anxiety-provoking. Because it was, you know, when you had those rules and those roles, you know, you kind of knew what was there. You kind of knew what the story was. Now you don't know what the story is. You're not sure what the relationship is like, what it should be like. You're not even entirely sure what you want it to be like. And that's a big challenge. So we're really forging ahead. Now that we are experiencing the Uranus-Pluto square, which astrologers are so excited about, rightfully so, between 2012 and 2015, now we are really in a spot where, you know, some of those things from the 70s and some things from the 60s are becoming much more overt, and we're working with them again in a much more overt way. So these issues keep coming up, but it's always a question of how are we recreating relationships.
Yeah, because when we look back in history, we have tradition, we have those things to go by, and there's a security in them. Whether they're dysfunctional or not, there's still a security in them.
But exactly. Whether they're dysfunctional or not, yes.
We know the script, you know, we know what we're supposed to do, you know, and we were taught those, but yet now the story's changing. My daughter's 17, and I'm trying to have conversations with her about these values, but I'm still trying to figure out how everything's playing out. It's changing so much.
And you can't know. You can't really know. We're creating. We're going forward creating. What I find to be kind of important, though, is that we still have that default image of relationship. We still have a little bit of that default Saturnian pre-70s image. Oh, we don't buy into it 100%, and we sort of like, shy away from it, and we don't want to buy into it, but it provides security. And one of the things, because you said even if it's dysfunctional, there's a certain degree of certainty and security. And one of the things about relationships is everybody, basic psychology is that it's, relationships are often a recreation of what we saw with our parents, or a recreation of our relationship with our parents, or an attempt to make a better relationship than the one that we had or the one that we saw. So, that's basic psychology. You often see that that's the case. There is some relationship between the original partnership that you saw and the one that you try to create, whether it's an imitation or a revision. And the thing is that relationships provide a sort of lunar security. Well, I often, one of the things I made a big point of in the book is that the moon is probably the most important relationship planet. Venus is about how we relate, it's about what we expect in our relationships and so on, but the moon is about our security needs. It's about our ego and our sense of attachment in the sense to the past, and that is what usually winds up coloring relationships a great deal. So, we are going forward, we are creating things, but we do have that sense of going back to those, those nice, whether, Lancelot and Guinevere or whatever your image happens to be. That was not a particularly happy relationship, but whatever your image happens to be, June and Ward Cleaver or whatever, we do kind of go back to that because we do look for those security needs. And what we're learning slowly since the 70s is that we can relate to each other as individuals and yet not bring in all of those security needs, because that's what really messes up a lot of relationships.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you'll meet, just the other day I was in the store and a man came in and he was bragging that he's been married for, 52 years, and so, we always ask the question, we ask the question, and the question is, well, how'd you do it? What's your secret?
Codependence. The secret is codependence.
And, every time I ask the question, there's this kind of faraway look like, well, you just got to trudge through, and make it to the other end like it's, an uphill thing. But then, I often wonder if, they've gone through so many changes together that they've made it to the other end to see, obviously in healthy situations that some things you have to work through together. Where do you draw the line between, somebody's going through a radical change and you stick through it, through that transit? Because again, this is the question I get a lot. Will he change at the end of his Saturn? Will he still be there? Will he be the person I'm waiting for? And it's always kind of hard to answer that question.
Well, it is hard to answer that question because, again, we have a great deal of freedom, a great deal of choice to make, particularly with outer planet transits. They're opening up new vistas for us, and it's very difficult. We know the flavor of an outer planet transit, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but they really offer too much in the way of freedom to make choices, to really know what's going to happen. I think back, again, back in the Saturnian day, when you only went as far as Saturn, then it was a little bit easier because then you could more or less predict that people would fall into the role one way or the other. But it's a good question, that guy that was married for 52 years, was that the best decision? They've survived that long, but that's not necessarily the happiest outcome or anything like that. You certainly get the gold watch for endurance, but You know, it's not necessary. Did you want to run that particular marathon is the question.
You know, but then, like you say in your book, which I, like I said, kind of can relate to this Neptunian theme, that, sometimes you'll go through a Neptunian transit and, you see something as it is, and then that transit passes, and then maybe the reality is a little different than, it's almost like we go through these periods where, we have these rosy-colored glasses on, and maybe that's necessary, or nobody would get into relationships. But
yes.
But then then you get to this other cycle, and you suddenly are dealing with possibly the same reality that you had, in the other relationship, because you brought you into that situation. I mean, I know this gets really complex, but how do you deal with those phases when you're just seeing everything one way and nobody can tell you anything, because we've all been there?
Sure. Well, yes. I mean, there's certainly those cases, and I think that there's a sort of Neptunian theme that goes across. There's a Neptunian glint to relationship all the time. I kind of agree with you. There's got to be a little bit of that, type of thing going on for most relationships. Not all. Some people are very practical about things, and some people just get Uranian excited, or Plutonian. They have to bond. They don't necessarily have that Neptunian thing, but it's true that we tend to. I always look at the chart of the individual that I'm talking to and their partner, if it's available, and so. What is the basic theme of relationships for you? I mean, if you're a Plutonian person or a Saturnian person, and you got into a relationship under a Neptune transit, so let's say the Saturnian relationship, somebody who really wants stability, solid partner, somebody who is going to be there, somebody who's going to be practical, and it need not be terribly exciting, but they should be reliable, that type of thing. And then under a Uranus transit, they all of a sudden find somebody who is, extremely dynamic and a free spirit, and they're so attractive. And then, well, what's going to happen then after the influence of Uranus subsides? Hopefully, they've opened up their perspective a little bit, because that's what Uranus opens. Uranus says, hey, you can change the channel. But if you've been watching Channel 2 all day long, and then somebody changed to Channel 4. You may not want to stick with Channel 4 forever either. What you've learned is that you can change the channel. It's not necessarily the first channel that you land on is the right one, Yeah,
wow. It's also fascinating, gosh.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned that one thing I love about your book is it's for those of us aspiring astrologers. Is that it's kind of like a study book too, because you can go in and read different descriptions, like you were mentioning. I don't know if I can find it, but talking about kind of that cardinal influence, that type of personality tends to jump into relationships really quickly after a breakup. Did I quote that right?
Yeah. Well. It actually, I mean, first of all, let me say we're all aspiring astrologers. There's no end to what you could learn. There's no end to what you could know. So there's all, you always feel that you're aspiring. But I thank you for that, saying that about the book. There are many different approaches. One thing I looked at is the modal picture, where people have cardinal or beginning energy, fixed or carry through or mutable, changeable energy, and how that affects both their internal mindset or their internal heart set, and then also how their life actually does respond. And sure, you can really see that there are different people are going to have different approaches. The same thing is true with the different planets. Well, they say the moon or Venus or something. How people are going to respond to a breakup. Some people are going to be very much like, gotta move on, and some people are going to be very much like, this is very, very difficult for them. So there's a lot of different variation in there. And as an astrologer, there's a lot of things to look at if you really want to get a good sense of it.
Now, you give some practical advice to the different phases, to the different themes that we've been talking about. We've mainly been talking about the Plutonic and Neptunian, but there's other phases. But at the end, you give some good tips, you know, when you're going through a breakup. One of the tips you gave for the Neptunian, which I really liked, is when you're going through that period of time to, you know, to get into doing something creative so that you don't fall down into that pit, you know, opening yourself up while you're going through that. Are there some other tips that people can, you know, that would be wise for them so that they don't just react by their emotions? I mean, because sometimes we can get ourselves into trouble too by reacting to our instincts.
Oh yes, yeah. No, building in a little space from your emotional reactions is a great idea with any of this stuff. Plutonian breakups, which can sometimes, the theme of them can be very very much a power struggle, often involves protracted legal battles, all kinds of things. But you know what? It can be an extraordinarily creative time as well. I know people who have really accessed their creativity to paint or write music or something like that after years of not doing so under Pluto transits, because that's when you go deep enough to really bring up heart stuff. You know, in addition to all the bile and all the other stuff that you're bringing up, it's also possible to bring up all of the other emotions and to put that into effect. Sometimes you should really just find somebody else's creativity, though. If you're in the midst of a Neptunian thing, I think all of that 19th century literature is great. You read Stendhal and Goethe or something like that would really be good for you. On the other hand, if it's a Saturnian thing, you're probably not going to be dragged into. You're not going to be attracted to things that are all that creative. You're probably going to want to just, you know, sit down and, well, let me figure out what to do with the checkbook over here, and you get like a practical approach often works best. And it's the antithesis of an emotional reaction. And you may be feeling sad, but I feel sad, but this is what I have to do. And so, you know, you just start packing away your stuff in neat little boxes or something like that. So there's a lot of things that you can do that will help you to get some space. Neptunian things, if you can go on a retreat, if you can get yourself out there and, you know, spend a week in the woods, or at you know, there's all different types of centers for meditation and stuff like that. Sometimes you can get yourself just, you know, use the openness towards moving you in a different direction. So there's a lot of stuff you can do, and it's really helpful, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think your book is absolutely fantastic. I think it's something, one of my favorite things about it is that you can open it up and kind of dive into different sections of it and keep rereading it, and all the stories are really fascinating. And I was amazed at, you know, how many of the stories, you know, it seems we all play out. You know, there's almost like there's only so many, you know, and yes, it's dynamic, but it's kind of like, you know, we see it everywhere. The same stories pop up. So it's really neat.
You sure do. Yes, you sure do. You sure do see the same themes playing out all the time. And you can. And one of the things, if you're not an astrologer and you're not ready, you could still read those basic patterns and you could just recognize them. You know, and then I'll hear stories sometimes on the news about this, that, or the other thing that happened, and I just, you know, that was Neptune right there. You know, you just kind of know that was Pluto, and it's what it was. You know, you start to pick up on the themes even without the astrology.
Well, and what advice would you give people that, you know, do have just enough astrology, you know, that they kind of understand that they're possibly approaching a Saturn cycle, or, you know, they're approaching something intense, and, you know, they know what that could mean? I mean, a lot of times we find out in hindsight, you know, we didn't have the help going in. I mean, is there any practical advice you can give people so they don't just, you know, a lot of times you don't want to throw it all away until you really work through your own stuff. I mean, is there...
Well, I would say don't anticipate. One of the things astrology students do a lot is to assume that you know, Pluto's coming around to Venus, and well, that's it. You know, there's no way this is going to work. This is going to be a disaster for the relationship or something like that, and that's just not true. You know, you may have a deepening of your relationship with Pluto transiting Venus. It may get really hot and passionate. You know, there may be a real sense of the connection really starting to reach a soul level rather than just the personality. So it's really not the case that you'll know in advance what's going on. Even bad relationships, or relationships that are extraordinarily different. I say bad not because I think that they're bad, but because sometimes they would be characterized that way. But relationships that are under a lot of stress and are having a lot of challenges, very, very frequently, when one of these these planets come up, so a Pluto transit, it could be the case that, well, now let's go into therapy and work on that. Pluto's certainly therapy. And Uranus comes in. Is it going to break up the relationship? Maybe, but maybe we decide, what, this will work a little bit better if we give each other some space. So you don't really know how it's going to play out most of the time. I give the example in the book of when I was a student. We were all sat around, and people came in, and we would sort of read their charts, and this woman had Pluto go into her house of relationship, and everybody was kind of figuring that she was going to be single soon. This was the whole 27. She had Pluto going into her house of relationship, and the guys were being all like consoling, and the women were like getting worried. And it turned out that she was pregnant, and so it was going to change her relationship substantially. It was a Plutonian experience, because Pluto is birth, among other things. It was a Plutonian experience, but it wasn't anything like anybody had predicted. So you just don't know. You don't know. I make that point a lot in the book. It's not a book about predicting breakups. It's a book about understanding them.
Yes, that is very true. That is very true. Well, that's kind of why I wanted to kind of clarify these different questions, because these are questions I look at when I'm looking at charts, and as I look back into other relationships, I see certain dynamics and what people were going through, and and how they changed through that, and some things definitely have fulfilled their purpose, and to be okay with that, give ourselves permission. I think there's a lot of pressure on our culture from the old school, from the old generations that we're still sorting through.
Yes. And again, that appeals to us as we would never think about this in any other area of life, because relationships play into that lunar security need so much that we are so ready to buy into that Saturnian rule type of thing, even though we know it's not really working. You would never see people, you rarely see people talking that way about their jobs anymore. Like, well, I'm going to be here for the rest of my life until I retire at this job. Who thinks that way anymore? 60, 50 years ago, that was a way to think, but nobody thinks that way anymore. Nobody thinks, I'm never going to leave this piece of land that I'm living on. That was the way people thought for a while. But when it comes to relationship, we're a little bit more willing to say, oh no, here it is, this is it. Put the lock on and hide the key.
Well, there's so many dynamics that go with it, with children and homes and scenarios and family, and it's kind of a ripple effect, and so I think regardless how we look at it, those are all things that we have to take into consideration.
Well, that's true. That is true. Yes, that is true.
I mean, that's just one of those things. Well, and I think with the internet, I mean, do you have any thoughts on kind of this whole relationship through the internet going on? Is this like our new generation? Are they going to be able to be substantial?
I would imagine that we cannot imagine what is going to happen in terms of technology and the way things are going to take us. I certainly people are going to meet over the internet. People are going to have their primary relationship over the internet with somebody who is very far away, as technology advances, they'll probably have a way to make that work out in terms of sex and physical intimacy, which already we have a pretty good model. I mean, the internet and sex are certainly never they've been together for a long time. So I wouldn't be too surprised with that. I almost begin to wonder things like what was the movie Her? Was it not about the the operating system that the guy falls in love with, and the idea that I mean, already people's relationship with Siri and the woman who gives you the GPS directions. I mean, already you've got kind of a little bit of a relationship with this mechanical thing, and it's at a very simple level. So I could who knows where it's going to go.
Well, I think it's interesting because Facebook, for me, in my generation, Pluto and Virgo generation, is kind of interesting because I've been able to reconnect with all of the my peers that I grew up with from kindergarten, that we all grew up in the same neighborhood on the same cul-de-sac, and our moms spent time together, and we went to the drive-in movies with families and 4th of July parties. And that just doesn't exist hardly now. My relationships are all on the internet with people I've never even met, are some of my greatest friends, and I just can't figure out how that's possible. But
it's so weird. I go to astrology conferences, and I look at people, and I have to sort of put a little square around their head so I can sort of picture. Oh yeah, that's it can be really difficult because yes, you can have you could have even contentious relationships with people that you've never met. It's very interesting, and but it allows us also to have relationships that are really based upon more or less, let's say, shared ideals, shared values. You can find your the level of that you let the water seek its own level fairly easily now. It was kind of a pain when you're living in a neighborhood, and that's what you had available to you. They were good people, but not necessarily sort of like family.
Well, I have people who call me out and they say, I can never get a hold of you on the phone, and I said, well, just private message me on Facebook so that I can answer and talk when it's convenient for me, and it's a totally different world. It's not as easy to actually have time to talk on the phone. You want to be able to jump on, jump off, and it's just such a different dynamic. We don't put ourselves out there as much. It's when it's convenient.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's something that is going to have to continue. I mean, that is something that is going to have to continue, and it does fly in the face of what we assume about intimacy. That there's a lot of time spent in the same physical proximity with each other, and there's some very nice things about being in physical proximity with somebody that we haven't managed to improve on. Despite technology.
I don't think we can improve on that. It's like we've got to remember that. That we can balance this out somehow, because I think a lot of people, it becomes easy to almost have these relationships where you don't have to give of yourself, and I think there's something about giving of yourself that is part of having a real authentic relationship. So,
well, it's sticky though. It's sticky because there is that aspect of surrender, that letting go into it, that is so very rewarding and powerful. And on the other hand, there is that whole giving up your sense of self and just making compromises for the sake of relationship that is it's clearly not working for us anymore. So it's a dynamic there. There has to be a soul level connection, and yet personality-wise, we kind of have to do our own thing. It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
But and maybe as we end up here, maybe that's the thing for us to all remember, is that this is tough stuff. We've broken out of the roles, and now the question is, how are we going to create going forward? And it's one big dynamic experiment, and the answer isn't there yet. We're working on it. That's our job. That isn't our job.
Yeah. Well, this was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Like I said, I'll have the link below where people can go over and subscribe and check out your channel and your website where they can get your book. I highly recommend this book to everybody, whether you're advanced or not in astrology. I think it's a fantastic book to really give you just a connection to what we all go through, and that there is kind of an answer. There's a reason, and I don't know, by being aware of that, I think it might help us be a little more grounded when we're going through these things.
Mm-hmm.
So That's my thought on it. It make, you know, the awareness is really important so that you can kind of ground yourself to, you know, certain fundamental principles that we all live by. So.
Well, thank you so much for that then. Thank you.
Yes. All right, you guys, if you have any questions, you can comment below, and I'm sure Armand would be happy to answer any questions. You can see the comments on YouTube, and you can view this recording on Chrystal Lynn, Cowgirl Astrologer. And thank you very much. We'll talk again soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, bye, Armand.